She's the most watched, most talked about, most jersey-selling athlete in women's sports history. She broke records that had stood for decades. She walked into a league that was struggling for mainstream attention and single-handedly dragged it into prime time. And yet, for a long stretch of her professional career, Caitlin Clark was earning less per year than some NBA players pay in a single fine. That is not an exaggeration. That is a documented, jaw-dropping, system-exposing fact. And it raises a question that has been burning through boardrooms, broadcast networks, and billion-dollar brand offices for the past 2 years. How long can a structure this broken hold back a force this unstoppable? Because when the most powerful businessman in basketball history decided to get involved, things stopped being theoretical very quickly. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because the story we are breaking down today connects money, power, legacy, and the quiet revolution reshaping women's sports from the inside out. Let's start with a number: $78,000. That is what Caitlin Clark earned from the Indiana Fever during the 2025 WNBA season. Her official, league-mandated salary for being arguably the most valuable player in the entire organization. Now here is another number: $100,000. That is the fine the NBA handed to Minnesota Timberwolves center Rudy Gobert in 2024 for making a money gesture at referees during a regular season loss. Let that settle for a second. A hand gesture cost one player more money than Caitlin Clark made playing an entire professional basketball season. And that right there is the fault line. That is the crack running through the foundation of women's professional sports, visible to anyone willing to look directly at it. Because Clark was not just playing basketball. She was building an entire economic ecosystem around a league that had been operating in the shadows for years. Her rookie season in 2024 was not just impressive. It was historically, statistically, financially unprecedented. She was involved in 20 of the 23 WNBA games that drew over 1 million viewers that year. 20 out of 23. The Indiana Fever, a franchise that had missed the playoffs for 8 consecutive years, suddenly became must-see television, selling out arenas, crashing merchandise servers, and drawing national television audiences that the league had never come close to before. WNBA merchandise sales jumped 601% from 2023 to 2024. 601%. And Clark's jersey was the single best-selling item in the entire league. The Fever's franchise valuation increased by 273% in just 12 months. A number that Harvard economist Judd Kramer said barely scratches the surface of her actual value. An industry source quoted in The Athletic put it even more bluntly, saying it is hard to believe she is not worth close to $1 billion to the league. $1 billion. And she was being paid $78,000. Before we get to what Michael Jordan saw in her, and why his connection to her story runs deeper than most people realize, you have to understand the full scope of what she actually created. It started in college. Caitlin Clark spent 4 years at the University of Iowa, transforming a regional fan base into a national obsession. She became the all-time leading scorer in Division I college basketball history, men's or women's, surpassing Pete Maravich's 53-year-old record. When she played in her final college game, the NCAA championship in 2024, 18.7 million people tuned in. Not just women's basketball fans, not just casual sports viewers. 18.7 million people, more than the 2023 NBA Finals, more than the 2023 World Series. It was the kind of viewership number that stops television executives mid-sentence. When she entered the WNBA as the first overall pick in the 2024 draft, the reaction was immediate and enormous. Indiana Fever season tickets sold out in less than a week. Arenas that had been half empty for years were suddenly standing room only, not just in Indianapolis, but on the road. Opposing teams began reporting higher attendance figures simply because Caitlin Clark was coming to their building. She was generating revenue for franchises she was playing against. That detail matters because it is the same thing economists discovered about Michael Jordan in the 1990s, that his presence created financial value not just for the Chicago Bulls, but for every arena he walked into. Researchers at MIT and Cambridge analyzed Jordan's impact on the 1991 to 1992 NBA season and found he generated $53 million for other teams through gate revenue and television rights alone. Clark's effect on the WNBA in 2024 mirrored that dynamic in a way that shook every economist who looked at the data. Her final college game alone reshaped how broadcasters thought about women's sports entirely, and she was just getting started. The brand deals followed fast. Nike signed her to an 8-year, $28 million deal, the most lucrative endorsement arrangement in WNBA history at the time, beating out Adidas and Under Armour in what became a full-on bidding war. Gatorade, State Farm, Goldman Sachs, Panini, and Wilson all came calling. The Wilson deal, in particular, carried a weight that most people missed. Caitlin Clark became only the second athlete in history to have her own signature collection with Wilson. The first? Michael Jordan. Same company, same exclusive status, different era, same level of cultural magnitude. That parallel is not a coincidence. That is a signal. Michael Jordan does not make moves without meaning. His business track record makes that clear. The Jordan brand alone generates over $5 billion annually. He built the Charlotte Hornets from a franchise into a legitimized NBA property before eventually selling his majority stake. He understands, better than almost anyone alive, what it looks like when a singular athlete begins to bend the entire commercial architecture of a sport around their presence. And what his agent David Falk said publicly in June 2025 was not small talk. Falk, the man who architected Jordan's original Nike deal in 1984, the deal that created what eventually became the Jordan brand, told Sportico that the WNBA Players Union would be making a serious mistake if it did not push to get Caitlin Clark involved in the league's collective bargaining negotiations. His exact reasoning was direct. The owners respect the top players. And if the top players are not in the room, the players lose leverage. Falk drew an explicit parallel to Jordan's own experience, noting that Michael was not on the NBA's CBA committee in 1998 either, but that his presence in the league made him impossible to ignore. That comparison is deliberately chosen. Falk is not throwing out flattery. He is drawing a structural parallel between two athletes who each, in their respective eras, became bigger than the financial frameworks designed to contain them. Jordan eventually forced the NBA to reckon with what a single player's presence was actually worth. And Falk is suggesting, clearly, deliberately, that Clark is at the same inflection point, the same moment, the same kind of leverage sitting unused. Jordan himself has not spoken at length publicly about Clark, but the dots connect themselves. The Wilson overlap, the Nike ecosystem they both inhabit, the fact that Falk, his closest business ally for 4 decades, is publicly drawing this exact comparison. When a most experienced agent in the history of basketball says your name in the same sentence as Michael Jordan's, in a financial and structural context, that is not an accident. That is a message being sent to every owner, executive, and broadcaster paying attention. Here is where the story gets complicated and human, because 2025 was supposed to be the year Caitlin Clark proved the 2024 explosion was not a fluke. Instead, it became the year she faced the hardest test of her life, and the results were simultaneously devastating and revealing. She played 13 games. 13. A quad strain early in the season cost her weeks. Then a left groin injury, then a right groin injury. By September, the Indiana Fever officially announced she would not return for the remainder of the season. In her own words on social media, she said, and this hit differently than any stat, disappointed is not a big enough word to describe how I am feeling. But here is what happened while she was gone. The WNBA's national television viewership fell 55% during a 2-week window when Clark was sidelined with her quad injury. 55%. The Fever's games specifically saw a 53% drop in televised viewership during that stretch. Networks noticed. Advertisers noticed. The league noticed. If there was any remaining debate about whether the Caitlin Clark effect was real, sustainable, or transferable, the injury period ended it. Her absence functioned like a controlled experiment, and the data came back unambiguous. She is the engine. What made the situation even more striking was what the Fever did without her. They still made the playoffs. They pushed the defending champion Las Vegas Aces all the way to a 5th and deciding game in the semifinals. Without Clark, without center Aaliyah Boston for stretches, short-handed and injury-ravaged, and still almost pulling off one of the most stunning upsets in league history. It was the kind of resilience that does not happen accidentally. It happens when a franchise has been completely rebuilt around a culture of competitiveness, a culture that Clark's arrival accelerated dramatically. And then she came back. The 2026 preseason return was shaky by her own standards, 2 of 10 from the field in 17 minutes. But the significance was never about the shot chart. Clark herself described the mental dimension of the comeback with unusual candor, telling reporters that returning from multiple soft tissue injuries is a real mental challenge, that her confidence has been up and down, and that she is working to rebuild trust in her own body. That kind of honesty from a superstar this young, this early in what should be a decade-long career, carries a weight that goes beyond basketball. It is the kind of thing that turns fans into something closer to family. Her third season has already shown signs of the player she is becoming, averaging over 20 points per game, improving defensively under new head coach Stephanie White's system, and leading a Fever team that is genuinely built to compete for a championship. The setback did not slow her trajectory. It clarified it. While Clark was working through her injuries, something else was building. A slow, steady, then suddenly explosive conversation about what WNBA players are actually owed and why the gap between their value and their paychecks have become impossible to defend. At the 2025 WNBA All-Star Game, players walked onto the court during warm-ups wearing black t-shirts with white text that read, "Pay us what you owe us." It was not subtle. It was not meant to be. The WNBA Players Association had opted out of the existing collective bargaining agreement the previous October, setting the stage for negotiations that would determine whether the league's growth would actually reach the players generating it. The numbers powering that protest were hard to argue with. Sonny Vaccaro, the former Nike executive who signed Michael Jordan in 1984 and is widely credited with understanding superstar value before almost anyone else in the industry, told TMZ that Clark's representatives had left enormous money on the table. His position was pointed. She should have gotten a piece of everything, just like Michael Jordan. The Jordan brand did not happen because Nike paid Jordan a flat fee. It happened because Jordan's camp negotiated equity, royalties, and a piece of the commercial infrastructure his name was building. Vaccaro believes Clark's situation, a fixed 8-year deal without that kind of structural ownership, represents a missed opportunity of historic proportions. The economics professor from Temple University, Michael Leeds, put in academic terms that were no less stunning. She is going to be massively underpaid because it is not just what she is doing for her team, but what she is doing for every other team in the league. That is the Jordan parallel made explicit by a credentialed economist. One player's presence creates economic value that spreads across an entire league, and the player herself captures only the tiniest fraction of it. The new collective bargaining agreement that emerged from those negotiations moved the needle in real terms. Clark's WNBA salary jumped from $78,000 to $528,000. A number that still seems almost comically low relative to her impact, but represents a genuine structural shift in how the league values its players. Angel Reese's salary jumped from $75,000 to around $350,000. Aaliyah Boston went from $94,000 to $574,000. The landscape changed. Not enough, many argued, but the direction was unmistakable. Now let's talk about what comes next, because this is where the Michael Jordan parallel stops being historical and starts being directional. Jordan did not build a $5 billion brand by accepting the terms that were offered to him. He forced new terms to be invented. In 1984, Nike gave him a contract that was, by basketball endorsement standards at the time, aggressive. But what made it historic was not the initial number. It was the equity structure, the royalty arrangement, the creation of a sub-brand with his name on it that could grow independently of any team he played for. The Jordan brand became bigger than the Bulls. It became bigger than basketball. It sells to people who have never watched a single NBA game in their lives. That is not marketing. That is mythology industrialized. Caitlin Clark is at an almost identical crossroads. She has the Nike relationship. She has the Wilson deal that only one other athlete in history has had. She has Gatorade, State Farm, Goldman Sachs, a portfolio of partners that span sports, finance, and mainstream consumer culture in a way that very few athletes ever achieve. She was named Time's Athlete of the Year in 2024. She pulled 18 million people to a college basketball game, and she is 22 years old. The signature shoe conversation alone is significant. When Jordan got his first Air Jordan in 1985, it was controversial, groundbreaking, and unprecedented. Nike was fined by the NBA for its red and black colorway, violating uniform rules, and they paid the fine willingly because the attention was priceless. Clark's signature shoe, expected to arrive in the near future, drops into a completely different landscape, one where women's basketball has proven commercial viability, where her face already sells out merchandise runs before they hit shelves, and where the competitive pressure from Adidas, Puma, and Under Armour is real. Being first to market in the right direction with the right equity structure, that is where legacies get financially codified. What Fox comments, the Wilson overlap, and the broader Jordan parallel all point toward is a question of architecture. Not just what deals Clark signs, but how she structures them. Whether she builds toward ownership, toward equity, toward the kind of commercial infrastructure that does not depend on her being on the court. Jordan's greatest financial moves were not made while he was playing. They were made because of what he built while he was playing. Clark is building right now. Every game, every sold-out arena, every viewership record, every black t-shirt and all-star game. These are not just moments. They are leverage. And the people around her, if they're paying attention to history, understand that the window to convert this kind of cultural gravity into lasting structural power is not infinite. It is right now. And the fact that the most decorated businessman to ever come out of basketball is publicly, structurally, symbolically connected to her story suggests that some very serious people are paying very close attention. Let's be clear about what the stakes actually are, because this goes beyond one player's contract or one league salary structure. If Caitlin Clark navigates the next 5 years the way the Jordan model suggests she could, building toward equity, ownership, a brand that extends beyond her playing years, and a platform that reshapes what female athletes are commercially permitted to demand. The ripple effects will not stay inside the WNBA. They will move. Every female athlete watching Clark is watching to see what is possible. Every brand manager watching her merchandise numbers is recalculating what women's sports sponsorship is actually worth. Every television executive who lived through the 2025 rating collapse during her injury absence now knows something they cannot unknow. Her presence is not a nice-to-have. It is structural. The absence of a single player dropped viewership by more than half. No league can build a long-term media rights strategy without accounting for that kind of dependency. And that dependency, properly negotiated, is enormous leverage. The WNBA itself stands at crossroads that Clark's situation has made undeniable. The league has proven it can generate historic valuations, record media rights deals, and mainstream cultural traction. The Fever alone jumped 273% in franchise value in a single year. The average WNBA franchise valuation rose 180% in that same window. That is not a bubble. That is a market discovering its own value after decades of being structurally underpriced. And at the center of it all is a 22-year-old from West Des Moines, Iowa, who went from playing in front of part-time crowds to becoming the axis around which an entire sports economy pivots. Someone whose absence causes a measurable market correction and whose presence generates billions more than she is legally permitted to earn. Michael Jordan looked at all of that. The numbers, the trajectory, the cultural gravity, the unrealized commercial potential, and the historical parallel to his own early years, and apparently liked what he saw. Because when the man who created the blueprint for Athlete is Empire starts drawing explicit comparisons between his own story and yours, through his agent, through the deals you're mirroring, through the business machinery beginning to align around your name, that is not coincidence. That is recognition. Here is the thought that should stay with you after this video ends. Caitlin Clark is, right now, in the earliest chapters of what could become one of the most consequential careers in sports history. Not just women's sports. Sports. The economic data already supports that statement. The cultural impact already supports it. The viewership numbers, the franchise valuations, the brand deals, the crowds on the road, the jersey sales, the pay protests, all of it points in the same direction. But here is the part that is genuinely unprecedented. She is doing this in an era where the conversation about what female athletes are owed is louder, more documented, and more commercially backed than it has ever been. The athletes before her fought to be seen. Clark walked in the door, already visible. And the fight now is about ensuring that visibility translates into the kind of financial and structural power that creates something permanent. Jordan built an empire, not just because he was talented. There were other talented players. He built it because the right people saw what he was building before anyone else did, because he was willing to demand structures that had never been offered before, and because he had the cultural gravity to back up every demand he made. The question is not whether Caitlin Clark has that gravity. The data already answered that one. The question is whether the people around her and the institutions that profit from her presence are willing to build something that reflects her actual worth before time and leverage shift to someone else. If they do, what comes next will be unlike anything women's sports has ever produced. And if they do not, well, history tends to remember who got it right and who got left behind. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think Caitlin Clark will eventually own a piece of the league she is rebuilding? Do you think the new CBA goes far enough? This conversation is just getting started, and I want to hear exactly where you stand. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. Hit that button, ring the bell, and stay locked in, because we cover stories like this every single week.